Hey guys, Ian Benjamin, Digital Hub. Hope you guys are well. Today, data guru. I am blessed to be in the company of Ovo Ghararo, who is Legal and General's Chief Data and Analytics Officer. He's a veteran of the industry, even though he's so young. I mean, have a look and see. He's such a young guy, and he's going to give us a bit of an insight into his vision, his perception of where data is, where it's going, and more importantly, in terms of his entrance, if you like, into the data sector. So without further ado, let's get into it. So Ovo, man, thanks for coming along today. I really appreciate you coming on board.
Thank you very much, Ian.
No worries. So give us a bit of an intro. Tell us a bit about yourself.
I sort of got into data. It's interesting because I got into data purely by accident. My starting career.
Let's take it back. So you know, I know you're based now in the UK, working for L&G. Yeah. We'll kind of get into that. So tell us a bit about your background, origin, blah blah blah.
Okay. So I had a very interesting story. I was born in Nigeria, lived there for about 8 years before my family moved to Brunei. So my dad worked for Shell, and we grew up. So my earliest memories, while I have some from Nigeria, most of it is actually around Brunei. So being around a completely different culture. So I think very early age, I was used to being around not a lot of Black people in Southeast Asia. Literally, I think there were probably about 10 families, Black families, and we all knew each other. And you know, you'd see another Black person and go, you'd not met before, and go, who are you? And you need to come round. You need to come round for tea. And that's literally how you got to know everybody, because you're like, you don't care who you are. Once you're out there and you're like, well, there are not many of us, you just get to know whoever's out there. But
yeah. So how come you were there real quick? I'm so nosy, but how come you were there in Brunei? Your dad worked for Shell?
My dad, he worked for Shell, and Brunei is an oil-rich country. So they do a lot of cross-posting. So they will literally take someone from where he worked in Nigeria and post them out to Brunei, and then take someone. So just literally, like, he was an expat in the country, and they did that a lot. He went out to South Korea. He went out.
What was his role? What was his role there? What did he do? Was he an engineer?
So my dad was an engineer. So he would, project manager, engineer. So he would actually work out on, sometimes offshore, on the actual field engineers, on the drilling sites, help actually discover oil and help them run the plant. So it was a very much oil man.
Wow, fantastic. That's interesting, man. I didn't know that about you. You've spoken before. Fantastic. That's really interesting. So brilliant. So you were there from like the age of 8, and then to what age? How long were you there till?
I was there until my first year of secondary school. So I think about 12-ish.
About 50 years.
So so it was like, about 4 or 5 years out there, and then came back to Nigeria, secondary school, boarding school, because my parents definitely wanted me to have some grounding in Nigeria, and it was tough coming back.
Was it really? Why?
Well, the culture shock again.
Yeah.
Because you've now spent time. I had an American accent at the time. If I go back and look at home videos of myself at that age, you just see a young Ovo with a proper American accent.
Wow, is that because of the television? Everyone's going to watch American.
No, it was because there was a big international community there. So all my teachers were Americans. There were a lot of Americans out there. And so I acquired an American accent from talking to people.
Wow.
And I remember distinctly, actually, when I first got to Brunei, I had a Nigerian accent when I first got there. My first class, I still remember this. They brought me into the class. They sat me down. The teacher spoke in what they said was English, but I had no idea what she said because I couldn't understand anything she said because of the accent. Everyone laughed, and I just sat there going, I don't understand what anyone's saying because of the accents. And I imagine they equally felt the same with my accent, that accents 100%. Can be a different thing. But yeah, when I came back to Nigeria, now I had another culture shock of just going, okay, this is Nigeria, and I have an American accent, and everyone thought I went to America. And I was like, no, I'm not. I didn't go to America, Brunei. And they're like, why do you have an American accent then?
Yeah.
And it's still there. Some people still say they get a twang when they talk to me. They hear an American twang in my accent.
Yeah, I can't hear at the moment. No, it's proper London at the minute.
Yeah. So I mean, what at some point in my career journey, I know I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but I worked as an assistant teacher. So when I would get up and teach, people did say that when I was teaching, I went more American when I was teaching. So sometimes when I am presenting, I sometimes find that people assume that I'm American because it's like, oh, you're an American. I'm like, no, you're sounding more. But I guess it's because in those formative years, I did talk for a very long time with
Right.
Americans.
With that American twang. That's interesting. Wow, Brunei. I mean, I'm assuming if you've been back there, you probably haven't, no? Not been back there.
I haven't been back to Brunei itself, but I have been back to parts of that place. So I went to Bali, went back to Bali just before the pandemic, going back again this year. Bali, very similar culture. Indonesia, just below Brunei. In actual fact, Brunei is on Borneo Island. Borneo Island has bits of Malaysia, has bits of Indonesia as well on it. Very culturally similar. In fact, they speak Malay in Malaysia, but they speak Bahasa Melayu in Brunei. So they would be able to understand each other.
Right.
But it's like but they have certain words that are different, obviously. So you'd say certain things and people go, "What do you mean by that?"
All right.
I learned a little bit of it when I was growing up. So
interesting. Well, that's interesting, man. Fantastic. Brunei, fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, cool. Let's kind of dive in. Let's come on diving in. So basically, so you done that, you came back to Nigeria and you went to a boarding school. So pretty affluent Nigerian family then, I'm assuming.
Middle class, yeah, very middle class family. So very much you could say, in fact, doing well, but not you've got Nigeria has this really interesting culture. A lot of people see the really poor sides of it.
And then a really wealthy side, yeah. It's a massive disparity, right?
Then you have people that are really ultra wealthy, and it's like they, almost. So I got to spend so my family was probably upper middle class in terms of wealth, and so yeah, could afford most things, but they're not overly spoiled. Not
absolutely.
Like it's coming out your backside. But I had friends in my school who that was their backside. That was literally their background. I mean, I'll kid you not, this is Nigeria talking about, and having someone drop them off at school in a limo is a big deal, not just because it's a limo, but it's also a big deal because the roads aren't very good.
Yeah,
so you wanted to drive a limo through not so great roads just to drop somebody off at a boarding school. But yeah, you did have people that regularly traveled out the country and were fairly wealthy or had parents that are fairly wealthy.
Yeah. I remember that years ago. I was in Ghana for about 6 weeks, many moons ago, in Accra, and it was just like really poor or just massive wealth. It was incredible. Do you know what I mean? The disparity. There's hardly anybody in the middle, to be fair. And yeah, I remember thinking that. But it's the same sometimes in the Caribbean, but not so much. But the same thing I've been to Cape Town, South Africa, and yeah, it's a massive disparity. It's really poor.
But I think the reason why that is, if you ask me, is because of unlike the West, where you have so much limitations on access or not access to the ability to create wealth, there's actually a huge ability in Nigeria to create, and Ghana to create wealth, because the ideas you see around you can be easily created to wealth. My uncle is fairly well off now, and he created his wealth by he came to Port Harcourt, which is where the town I grew up in, and he's from a state called Delta State or Warri, and the bread that we'd eat growing up, he came to Port Harcourt and realized they didn't have that same type of bread, and he went, "Oh, I can bake this bread." That was his idea. He went to my mom. He said, "Could you give me some money?" My mom said, "Here's some money to set up a bakery and start baking bread." He started baking bread, and he just grew that business baking bread in Nigeria. It became a huge thing. He was known. His brand was Delta Loaf, and he was the bread that people would say, "Oh, this is the bread people started wanting in Port Harcourt." An entire town started wanting your bread. And to give context now, I went to Nigeria just last week to see my uncle. This is 30 years down the line from when he started, building, making baking bread, but he's living in a life of absolute luxury. I mean, we're talking about a massive house with a swimming pool beside it.
So he's making dough, literally making serious dough.
It looked like I was driving up to the White House when I was coming to his house. But he started it off. I knew where he started. I remember when it was a 2-bedroom flat, starting off a bakery business, making bread. But then he's now got a fast food restaurant. He's got he's got multiple businesses. He was, at one point, he was just literally, one of his businesses was literally just bottling water. So it's not about having big
100%. Yeah, I agree.
It's about just finding something
and caning it
and growing it over time. Those sort of things don't really happen as much here because, I mean, as Black people here, we don't have access to the kind of finances you require to make those things happen. Maybe people wouldn't give you the same opportunities. You don't have the same problems around, racism and not being given the opportunity. I think Nigeria, Ghana, these places, if you've got a really strong work ethic.
I spoke about this earlier last week on the podcast about having the desire. Academics are great, fantastic. I won't tell anybody not to go and pursue academics and so forth to support their development of their career, etc. But in terms of the desire, you've got to have that desire as well to succeed. And a lot of businessmen, we all know that your uncles, for example, but he hasn't got the academic degrees, but he got an idea, worked at it, and now he's blinging it up big time in Nigeria. Making serious dough, if you know what I mean. I keep mentioning it. I don't think you caught it. I said dough, making dough, which is fair play to him. I'm glad the penny dropped eventually.
Yes, he is making dough and dough at the same time.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Fantastic. Superb. Brilliant. So Data, come on, man. I mean, you are, round of applause, CDO, legal and general. That's a big fat gig, man. So well done, fantastic. And so when did you kind of first dip your toe in the world of data? When did that first happen?
How did that first happen? By accident, and I pulled the toe straight away out of it because I thought the water was too hot.
Really?
Not even joking. So I used to work at a firm called Deloitte years ago. This is where I started my graduate career.
So you were pretty much quite again, you can touch on it, academic, numbers, light numbers, etc.
Yeah. So I went to Imperial College, studied engineering, came out with electrical engineering, first class degree from that, went into Deloitte as a management consultant, got into IT procurement of all things. It wasn't quite what I thought it would be, but I was in IT procurement. And I know really interesting work I did there. I mean, the most interesting pieces of work I did there was I was involved in the congestion charging relet. So actually finding the right vendor to deliver congestion charging to London. Not very popular back then when you tell your friends what you're doing. You're part of the people putting congestion charging. Now we take that as standard, but actually looking at the complexity of that project, it's like, 18 months to pick a vendor and then 3 years to implement. So it was quite a long.
I mean, I've got a bone to pick with you because I mean, when that first kicked off around 2002, 2003, and it wasn't working right. And I remember I drove to London because I live in Bedfordshire, and I drove to London and I went to pay for it online when I got to work or where I was doing some consultancy work at the time, and it wasn't working. And I made the payment, and I thought, I said, I'm done and dusted. It had worked. But then it hadn't gone through at their end, hadn't processed. The next time I get a fine, it's about £150 or something like that. And then I detested it. And then do you know what they'd done? They threatened to take my car away off my drive. I think I had to pay like £400 in the end. So man, me and you got
sorry. So there were lots of hiccups with these things at the beginning because London was the first city to try and do this at mass. So very much we were the first in the world. And then I know the same team that implemented it in London went off to other cities in the America to do the things because we were the first country or first city to try and do something at that scale.
Wow,
endeavor.
When you think so Deloitte got awarded the contract through like the highways agency, something like that, was it?
I imagine so. I mean, I didn't know the details of that because I was quite junior on this particular project.
Right.
But the thing that then got me into data was then I was put on a project with a firm called Nomura, and they were doing a financial services data project.
Right.
And it was like they were speaking a different language. They were
Wow.
just talking about ISINs and if an asset's fungible and CEDOs and bonds and equities and corporate actions and dividend payments and coupon payments. And I'm just sitting there just going, I have no idea what's going on here.
Wow. This is all at Deloitte, because you were there for like 5 years.
I was at Deloitte, and I'm sitting there listening to all this stuff and going, this is not my gig. I did it for about 3 months and went, my toes are not, I dipped it and it's not working. Put me back into procurement, please. So I went back into procurement.
Yeah.
Did a few more years in procurement. Then I actually got asked to come and support a senior manager at Prudential. This was still at Deloitte. And he was looking to acquire an enterprise data management solution. So
say that again. It's going to require what? Sorry,
an enterprise data management solution. So the technology to actually implement an enterprise-wide data management solution for Prudential. This will support a regulation called Solvency II, just straight after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. The PRA introduced some new regulations for insurance companies to disclose their total assets and their capital requirements to ensure that they wouldn't have the same problems that the banking industry had. So the equivalent of Basel.
The PRA, that's like the Procurement Something Association. Procurement.
That's the Prudential Regulatory Authority. They're the regulators for insurance companies. So I was just there to come in for 7 weeks and do a procurement. But I went, look, I've been doing procurement, back-to-back procurements for many, many years, never done an implementation. I'd like to stick around doing implementations. I said that to the senior manager. He quite liked me. I did a good job for him doing that procurement. And he went, okay, fine. Come and join and just be like a project manager for what we're doing. So he resold me as a project manager on the project. After about 3 months in, they were doing some training to implement the new software. And I went, hey, can I just do some training? Look, I studied engineering background. I've done some programming. I've done some coding. I could show up and do this as well. He went, sure, we have an extra seat. You can come in and sit with the implementation team. Not really expecting much from me, but I came in. I was always there going, I just need to learn as much as I could.
Yeah.
And I just literally just sat in the class with everybody else, taking as much as I could. And we did a final assessment for the class, and me and the senior manager both got the joint highest score for the entire implementation team, and that got everyone going. Who is this guy? Wow. I mean, the senior manager is
how many people there? How many people? Like 10, 20?
The implementation team was probably about 15 odd people, but there were people who have been doing implementation for years. I was the person coming in going, I know nothing about data.
Wow.
But I just want to come in and learn, and you score the joint. It got people's ears going, oh, who is this guy and how does he, I'm like, look, I just want to learn what's going on. So I was just really keen to understand.
Curious. And
just really get into it. And funny enough, the person who did the sale for that particular system, which was then called Cadus, not called Market EDM, we stayed good friends. I mean, he became a chief data officer later on, but all throughout my entire career, I've always had checkpoints of talking to him for career advice as well. So networking is so important.
Right. What's the guy's name?
Andrew Barnett.
Barnett.
And yeah, so he's someone who I've known right back from when I started properly data work, but I came in not knowing anything, and he kind of looked at me and said, "Oh, I think at one point he tried to get me to join Cadus, and again tried to get me to join other companies. He's tried to poach me a few times. He's not succeeded, but he did try and poach me a few times over the years. But no, we've stayed good friends, and he's given me some good career advice as well.
Super.
So on that particular project, basically my first role, proper data role, effectively became a data engineer. I was sitting there developing software for data. So technically I was a data engineer. I then went on to become a data analyst. And I stayed on that particular project for about 5 years, doing all sorts of roles. I was a tester.
So where was you working then? So was that when you were doing, was that also Deloitte, or is that
I was at Deloitte. So at Deloitte, working for Prudential,
right? Okay.
implementing their Solvency II solution. So in that period, I know I did every role. I was a tester, I was a test manager, I was a BA, I was a DA, I was, data analyst, business analyst, data engineer, and a project manager. And at one point, I actually was seconded into the Prudential, where I was their head of data management for a year.
Right.
So I got the experience of doing that as well, building out the target operating model for that. In all of that, I mean, I became known as the person who understood data. And just to put a context around it, the project I delivered at Prudential, the Solvency II project, was the first Solvency II implementation in the world. So it's
the first what? Sorry, say it again. The first what?
First Solvency II implementation in the world. So it was the first one out the gates. Prudential was the first people to introduce their numbers. And the software I was looking to implement, which is Cadus, now Market EDM, the industry standard for failure of those implementation of this software was really about, the defect rate was around 30% as industry standard, 30% failure of code on first implementation. Our team got it right down to less than 2%.
Wow.
So okay, we were far beyond the standard. No, look, I just did what I thought was good practice. I had no idea how good or bad I was. I was just doing stuff because I was like, oh, this is what I want to be excellent. I want to be good at everything. So throughout this, I was just, I didn't know if I was good or not. In fact, I had a lot of self-doubt.
Why do you think that it is then, in terms of why you got it down so low at the first?
Because I didn't accept what people were telling me. So I honestly felt that a lot of times people accepted like, oh, code's going to go live with defects. I'm like, why?
Yeah. Okay.
And so I started looking at why we were having defects. And it was little things like a requirement document would get signed off. Someone would go in and start making changes to it after it was signed off. And those changes were maybe to another phase of the implementation. Maybe the next, a year from now, we're going to do that. But then you're making changes to the same document without making it clear that these changes do not relate to this deployment. The developer goes in and looks at the document, picks up these changes that maybe halfway through are not signed off, and starts implementing them, and then he introduces a bug into code. So not being clear on that stuff, having long lead times between the point where a user says they want this and when they actually implement something was a problem as well, because they have time to change their mind. Having BAs who do not have any interest in what so a BA who believes a deliverable is a requirement document. That is a problem, because they'll just go, oh, I've written my requirement document over to you guys in delivery. They have no interest in going, no, as the BA, my job is to deliver a fully working solution back to my customer. So that's a mindset switch I did. All the BAs also have to be involved in signing off the actual work, not just the requirement, testing the software.
It actually works. Yeah.
Was worked as well. So before the users got to even test it, the BA involved have said, yes, it ticks back to everything I said. So I made sure they had full commitment throughout the entire delivery window. All of these stuff were not things people were telling me to do. It's just like, when this logically makes sense, you guys, you do your bit and then you head off to your next project, and you don't even bother coming to look at.
Yeah, I think that's not my job. I don't really care about the outcome. I just want to do my little.
Precisely. My job is to deliver a piece of paper that says this was a requirement. And I went, no, your job's not to deliver a piece of paper that says it's a requirement.
Does it actually work?
Your job needs to be to deliver a completely working bit of software. In actual fact, all of these are now what we call agile. But I was just kind of delivering them because I thought they were good practice. Now I read and go, these are all the agile behaviors you should be having. By the time we weren't delivering with agile, I was just kind of making this stuff up as I was going along, because I thought they were really sensible things to do.
So it's good to double check what you're doing, not just doing it to actually have that agile methodologies to see whether it's working. Okay. So during that journey, really interesting. When did you start learning Python at all during this?
Didn't learn Python until many years later.
Oh, really?
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So Python was not a thing that I picked up until I thought to myself, I'd like to start doing analytics, because so far I talked to you about my data engineering background.
Right.
Then I got into operations when I ran the data management function. Then I then got approached by M&G. M&G is an asset manager
Yeah,
for
of course.
the Prudential. And so they asked me if I wanted to come and join M&G full time. I left Deloitte, joined M&G full time. I was running the data management operation, the operations function.
Okay, so
Let's be clear.
this is like 2018 is around that sort of time, right?
Let me think back. When would have that been? Yeah, it's about 2014, about
Was it?
thereabouts.
Oh,
14,
okay. Sorry. Yeah. So I've got here.
14, 13, I'm trying to think back
2014. Yeah.
as to when that was. But I know I was with M&G for about 7 odd years. So it may have been a bit earlier.
2014. So you went in there as head of data management operations.
Yes, that's correct. So, and in that, let's be clear here. I'm still baffled as to how I got that job. When I look at it, when I look back at it retrospectively, I mean, I'm lucky in that sense, but I knew very little about what it would be. I didn't know anything about the asset management industry. They just see me deliver a project successfully at Prudential and thought, oh, this guy's good. What can we offer him? And they offered me a job to run a department of 25 people. And I'm sitting there going, these people in this department know more about what they're doing than I have any clue of what. And I think for a year, I could tell around. But again, I'm okay with that because I was happy to literally learn from them. I had to run 3 teams. One was a valuations team responsible for valuing, the 150 billion or pounds of assets that we had at the time. I think the entire company, M&G, was like 300 billion pounds of assets. So responsible for overseeing all of that. Then I had a market data budget, something in the region of 13 million to oversee and make sure that was being managed properly. And then I had like 15,000 assets or 15,000 securities. I was responsible for ensuring that the data quality of those were great as well. So there was a lot of responsibility. I remember being very stressed most days.
Yeah, sounds like it.
With all that responsibility, but also learning by just doing and having a huge commitment to just, really understanding the craft. And I really got to know valuations by just going, I'm going to get stuck into this stuff. I mean, I'd sit on a Bloomberg terminal, I would get books, I would ask questions, sometimes not being afraid to say, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know. I'm just going to ask and I'm going to discover, I'm going to do. And over time, you just find that you've learned a heck of a lot in a short period of time, that even your team, like I had one of my managers say to me, oh, well, how did you pick up all of this? I knew you didn't know this like 6 months ago, but somehow you're now the person we come to ask questions when 6 months ago you were asking us. How do you know so much so quickly? What did you do? And I went, I asked questions. I understood it. I got my head around what we were doing.
Yeah.
I really got into it. I would spend the time. I would come in early. I would stay later. I would do all the things I needed to do to make sure I understood it so I could feel comfortable making decisions. I was with auditors all year round, KPMG, Deloitte, EY, PwC, all the auditors were always in there asking me questions. I was challenging stuff I was seeing in the industry. I'd go and join all the industry bodies and go to conferences, and I would talk about stuff, and I would be part of the valuation committees and the liquidity committees and learn about how the business was working by listening to people and asking questions, talking to our COO of our business, talking to the head of operations. Literally just get yourself stuck in and don't feel shy. My only thing was, I know that, so, I had a fear of, obviously, that as a senior Black person in the industry, they go, how did you get this job? Did you, what's your qualifications and so on and so forth. But I went, look, I've got it. All I can do now is just do my best in this particular role. So I think throughout that, I was always keen to really, really understand. And I know.
What do you mean by that? Was someone ask you that, or did you feel as though that you hadn't got the qualifications?
Well, let's face it. There was no other person, any of the meetings I went to, in any internally or externally.
No one of color, you mean? No other Black person.
Precisely.
Right.
You'd
Okay.
sit
Cool.
down the tables where you'd have 20 odd people, 30 odd managers, 30 odd senior managing directors now, big meetings, and you're the only one who's black. You know, you're the only one who looks like you, has your background. You'd go to conferences, you'd go to clients. The amount of times, and it happened to me, that I would be mistaken for a security guard
Yeah, man.
standing outside my building. I'll literally be standing there with a suit and tie, waiting to pick up someone, or going, or even visiting a vendor. In some cases, I'm visiting a vendor, and I wouldn't say which vendor because that's not the point.
Right.
And you're standing outside waiting to be picked up, and somehow somebody would come in and think you were the security guard and maybe ask you to let them into the building.
Wow,
And I don't work here.
it's crazy,
Like,
yeah, crazy.
I don't work here. But
Mental.
it's because of they didn't see you back then.
Yeah,
A lot
yeah,
of people
yeah.
look like.
So did someone actually say that to you in terms of have you got the qualifications, or did you just feel that from being around that table?
Well, one person, but one person
verbally actually come and say to you, why are you here? Have you got the qualifications? Has that actually happened?
So I definitely had one person bold enough to say something of that like to my face, but I knew that some people had said it behind my back. And I said, "Oh, but what qualified? I don't get it." Like, the good thing was 2 years down the line, a lot of those same people had been completely persuaded that, okay, I get it. I get what this guy brings to the table. And literally, 5, 6 years down the line, they're like, no, this guy's the go-to guy for all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I did turn them all around to a point where they were like, oh, no, this makes perfect sense. But yet, I can understand where they'll come from, because I didn't have, literally, I had no experience in the air industry. I had no experience in asset manager. It was the first one I was in. I had no experience with any of these. I knew Solvency II inside out.
Insolvency.
And I knew Solvency II, the regulation that I had been working on for 5 years. I knew that inside out. I understood data quality inside out. I understood data engineering inside out. I understood project delivery inside out. I could deliver that stuff. I could manage budgets. I could do all the stuff. So I knew what I knew.
Yeah, but you didn't know the actual industry, that particular sector. You knew all the skills that could be transferable to other sectors.
Precisely. So I knew that I had to transfer. I knew that I had to, make sure that my communication skills were on point. I knew that I had to, all the things I had to do, I did. I asked the right questions. I was curious. I kept working. I kept grafting. But I knew that eventually you're going to get to a point where, one, you're accepted, and two, you're actually seen as the person. Well, the best advice I got given during that period, I give it to everyone now when it comes to this stuff, is define your brand and keep it consistent. Define your brand and keep it, understand what your value, what your brand is, and keep it consistent. And at the time I was like, what is my brand? And I then realized that my brand was these three intersection points. Where I had data, operations, and technology, complex problems that dealt with data, operations, and technology was my brand, because that's what I dealt with when I did Solvency II. I have been involved in outsourcing 150 billion pounds of assets to a third party. Again, complex, very short window, technology, data, operations involved. I have been involved in implementing global solutions that, bringing, 600 billion pounds of assets. Again, complexities around data, operations, and operations. Those three things, whenever those they occur. So what happened at M&G was I would tell people that's what I did. And any project that had anything to do with complex data, technology, and operation project, that go, oh, you need to get Ovo involved. To a point that people forgot what my job title was.
Yeah, you were just a guy.
They just forgot what my job title was. They just go, oh, you're dealing with data, complex, just get Ovo involved. Like, they didn't care what my job title was anymore. And I stopped caring what my job title was as well, because I just go, right, this is my brand, this is my identity within the company. I considered myself an intrapreneur as opposed to an entrepreneur, which is you're within an organization and you're looking for problems that you can solve within the company. You're creating an identity and a brand for yourself within the organization. So definitely I was the person, the go-to man for that while I was at M&G.
Superb. And then, so I mean, you spent quite a long time there, and then
I spent 7 years there, and if you can count my 5 years at Prudential, I spent 12 years at M&G and Prudential.
Yeah.
With data in financial services.
Financial services, yeah. I mean, and also from asset management, that side, that whole piece. And then from there, so you use those skills, and then you got out of the industry. So you went to work for Get, right, which is like more transport, communications, etc. So, why did you not want to stay in that niche, or did you want to? How did that?
Well, the reality is, I did want to stay in M&G, and I was looking for an opportunity within, and the company was looking like, I'd been saying it for about 2 years before I left, that I was looking for an opportunity to step up, and what they were offering me just wasn't the right fit for me. So I basically said, look, if they can't find something for me internally, I gave them a lot of time they tried everything. They offered me more money. They, gave me a bigger build, all that stuff. But I went, look, it's not quite fitting. I kind of just made it clear on LinkedIn.
So let's just, just for people listening and watching. So basically, at that time, it's like 2020, COVID going on.
This was before COVID. So it was back in 2018 was when I made it very clear that I actually was looking. So they had 2 years, in my opinion, to step into the field. I end up moving during COVID. So I started interviewing just before COVID hit.
Right. Because the last role you've got, I mean, for there it says head of investment and data solutions. Head of investment data solutions. That was 2020. You left there 2021. September 21. But they knew you were getting ishy feet and you wanted more of a challenge.
Yeah. And even that role I had, the head of data, investment data solutions.
Yeah.
I was the first head of investment data solutions in the organization because I sort of made the role up. I basically was just a person that went around fixing big data problems within investment data. And I would go and talk to the investment teams, find out what their problems were, and then would get a budget, write a business case, and then go and implement it. Just put context around it. The team I was running cost the company about $2 million a year to run.
Wow. How many people was in that team?
But the team I was running, over the 2 years I was running them, saved the company $4 million per annum.
Per annum.
So we didn't just meet our costs. We
making profit.
We weren't profit because we stripped out costs. We didn't add to the budget, but we simply stripped out £4 million worth of cost with the work we did. And that's a per annual cost, license fees and everything else. So we more than pay for ourselves, but that team consists of engineers, analysts, scrum masters. So it was literally a proper change team, a task force, everybody that needs to be involved in implementing change. I would go and say, where's the problem? I would write the business case of how we're going to solve that. I would present it to the COO. She would go approved, and then would go, right, get the people we need into the team, implement this. We've got this much time, deliver, done. What's the next problem we're picking up?
Right, gotcha.
The team didn't always it wasn't all permanent members of staff in the team. We had some permanent, we had lots of contractors.
Yeah, like 15, 20 people, that sort of thing, sort of thing.
Yeah, so the team size would fluctuate, but effectively the team itself cost about $2 million each year to run.
Gotcha. Okay, cool, fantastic. So what did you want to do then? So you're doing that, you're like Mr. Fix It of data.
I think I wanted to just do more. I think I didn't know what the next step would be. And then when someone approached me to be a chief data officer at Get, I went, why not? It's a different industry, true.
Yeah, you mean at Get obviously just transferred into something new, so it's more of a challenge.
But it was still data, and I understood data.
Yeah.
I got my head quite quickly through the ground transportation industry, which is the industry I was in, but the actual thing we were doing, it's the same principles I applied all throughout my career. Going, ask questions, learn about it, and start getting your head through what you need to do. And what I loved about Get was, though it was a chief data officer role, it was really a chief data and analytics officer, because a lot of the value we were producing was through the analytics side. And I definitely wanted to do that. So I'd done the engineering side, a lot of that. I wanted to spend my time doing the analytics side. The difference for me between analytics and engineering being that with analytics, we are constantly looking at the value proposition. around data. We need to kind of drive out the value that we're getting from data. Yes, when we're looking at data engineering, we're saying, okay, how do we get this data from where it's coming from?
Yeah,
how do we
right.
make sure it's got good quality? How do we store it in the right place? How do we pipe it to the right location? How do we make sure it lands with customers? Great. Analytics go, yeah, you now engineer the data. It's now here. How do we get the value from this? How do we get the insights from this?
Yeah.
How do we make good business decisions on the back of this? How do we inform people? How do we describe what's happened in the company today? How do we predict what might happen in the future? How do we get prescriptive about
you're using the data, now you've got it, it's been engineered, now you've got to kind of make value out of it, challenge the data, and to make predictable outcomes so you can make decisions from it. So,
yeah, absolutely.
And that wasn't really what you did before. You were more kind of like fixing the engineering side of it.
Right.
And then so you went into that role. Was there an existing team?
There was an existing team in there.
The strategy of what they wanted. So they had the data there, but they were saying to you, what can we do with this data? Was that
so there was no one at the senior level, there was no one at the board level that understood the challenges around data and could come in and explain to them what to do with it. The people had ideas but didn't have the gravitas to make it occur. I worked for the CFO of the company and effectively was looking to take the team that was there. They had several heads of analysis and turned that into a strategy and say, okay, here's where we'd focus on. So created focus, created objectives and key results that we'd expect to see over the next year or so. Really helped to bring them together. There were 80 people in total across the company that worked for me in one way or the other.
Right, okay, good, superb, man, amazing, man, well done, man, well done. And again, not many black faces doing what you're doing at all, so that's significant, really, really significant. But I would have kind of like to change it up a little bit. So you and I spoke, and we were chewing the fat for ages a week or two ago, before you went to Nigeria, and we were talking about the technology versus the data, or technology in terms of procurement of software versus the value of data, and that getting in the way of what a company wants.
So I think I tell people this all the time now. It's interesting that it used to be called, or it's still called IT, but when it shortened IT, they say, oh, you work in technology. It's called information technology, not technology. It's information technology. The I seems to have dropped out of people's conversation. A lot of people become directors of technology. And when they do that, they think only about technology, only think about, oh, what servers do we need? What hardware do we need? What database sizes do we need? It's all technology, technology, technology. The reality is when it comes to data is all about information. We actually don't really care that much about technology. When you think about pure data person, they care about the insights they can get out of it. You can write Python in different places. You can either write in Python, write in R, you can write in several different languages. It's not necessarily about just picking one language and that's the one, that's not the point of it. Whether I'm using Excel, whether I'm using Power BI, whether I'm using Tableau, whether I'm using, these are all tools. I'm trying to do a linear regression model to ensure that I can see the correlation between two outputs, to then tell myself how much of the difference change in A results in an impact and change in B. That's data. That's not technology.
Yeah. So you're seeing it a lot where you're seeing roles or having conversations with like CTOs and or arguments and debates about data and where it's going. And
they want to talk about technology.
People, they're getting caught up in the actual tech, apart from the actual value of
No one's sitting there talking about what models do you. No one has ever in an interview asked me, what models do you know, and can you talk me through why you pick one model over the other? One of the questions I ask you when they interview with me is, can you explain to me the difference between a mean, median, and a mode? And the amount of people that struggle with that question, and it's a pure data question, it's an analytics question. Why do you use mean, median, mode? Rather, they want to tell me about how many Power BI dashboards they built and how many Tableau dashboards they built. Like, look, the tech is tech. I want to talk to you about data and analytics. So you're almost substituting the amount of CVs, the amount of roles that I see for chief data officers, and they write at the bottom, do I write in Python and R, or do I use my advanced SQL knowledge? When's the last time I actually wrote in SQL? No one's expecting me to actually sit there all day long and write SQL statements. So they shouldn't be asking me that stuff. They should be asking me, do I have the vision of how to understand a business problem?
Get the value out. Yeah.
Translate that to the value. So
why is that then? Because obviously, ultimately, the CTO wants the value out of the data, right?
I think they honestly don't see, this is my opinion, that CTOs honestly do not see the difference between technology and data. And a lot of them I've spoken to think data is a subset of technology, and they don't see the distinction. Now, I prefer whenever I report into a CFO, because the CFO just goes, show me the value. Whereas a CTO talks about technology, and it's rightly so. CTO is a chief technology officer. They want to talk about tech. That's what they know. It's the language they speak. They're just adjacent. It's almost like the best way I described it to someone was, it's like we're talking about British versus American when they're speaking. We both speak English, but we can say things so differently that we think we're saying the same things. When someone says, I'm taking the subway versus the tube, the underground, like what's an underground?
Yeah.
Speaking English, but you're actually saying, oh, we're taking out the bin or the trash? Are we going to the toilet or the loo?
Yeah.
And
lift up the hood, up the bonnet.
If you don't know the two terminologies, you would go, I don't understand what this person is saying to me. What is a lift or an elevator? And these
lift up the hood, lift up the bonnet. So I mean,
precisely.
So I mean, but as well. So with the CTO, so basically it's a CTO versus the CFO a lot of the time, or it could be the CMO, because because the marketing team, they need to have data insights about what's working, what isn't working, blah blah. So maybe in some instances that it's got to be a crossed job description in terms of the JD
or as I see it, really honestly, the evolution of this is the chief data analytics officer. And actually, I think it shouldn't just have a chief data officer. You should definitely have a chief data analytics officer. But I even see it evolving even further. I think you should have a chief data analytics and AI officer, right? Because AI is the next evolution. It's data and AI. Yeah. Now, once you start throwing those together, you start realizing that if you do not have a data analytics and AI strategy organization, you will soon find yourself lagging behind. A lot of people are still trying to do their digital transformation. I'm telling people, you're still trying to do a digital transformation now. You missed the boat, but don't worry. Start looking at AI transformation because it's here right now.
Yeah.
Like the technology is there. You should think about how you bring this in. The chief digital or the chief data analytics and AI officer should report into the CEO of the company, should be on the same footing as everybody else. Because why is that? It shouldn't just be a subset of finance, because the finance officer does not get data. The technology officer does not get data. It's like saying, oh, because finance uses SAP to come up with the numbers, that finance should report into the CTO. What?
No.
It's just tech. No, they don't care about technology. They don't care that if it's SAP or Oracle. They care about the actual accounting numbers. They care about the numbers. They don't care about the technology.
Where it's coming from. Yeah, exactly.
And the same thing is happening in data. We don't care if we're using AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud.
GCP is about. Yeah.
That's not the point. We don't care if we're using Databricks to do it or we're using RStudio. Like, those are just technologies. The point is, do you have the models, the skills, the understanding of what is data governance, what is data quality? These are things that have nothing to do with whether I know Calibra or I know Informatica. These are all tech. We spend far too much talking about tech.
The actual tech.
Actually saying, what are the data skill sets? So I think as well, data professionals need to take the time to define what the data skill set are. I'm tired of looking at job specs where we ask people, do you have experience in Calibra? Do you have experience in Informatica? Do you have experience in Azure? Do you have experience? Like, those are all tech. Rarely do you see a CV that says, can you explain to me your experience in understanding data accuracy? How do you measure that? Explain to me how you extract completeness level in data, because that's the real job. The real job is if you get that, now you translate that to someone in technology who goes, okay, I can now build the thing you're saying. So
Right.
at this point in time, here's the reality. I know I mentioned a figure earlier on about 30% failure rate. The failure rate of data lake projects right now is at 60% failure rate. 60% failure rate. 60% of all, according to Gartner, 60% of all data lake projects fail. They're all technology led. So we have to bear in mind that data is something that's still in its infancy, that until we actually create it as a separate discipline that actually goes, this is what data stands for, you'll never get to a point that you go, I get it now. I get why I don't really care if I'm using Azure or AWS, because they're both equally valid and equally viable options. They will both work. It's the same debate where someone has on, am I using an iPhone or am I using a Samsung phone? It doesn't matter.
Right.
It's actually, I'm going to just go on Instagram, use WhatsApp. It's about the software on it. It's not about the actual phone.
Yeah, the actual hardware. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's just obviously, I don't know how that's going to work. So it's having a standardized template of rules, processes that equal the outcome. Maybe that's got to be the.
I think
standardization.
I think what will need to happen, honestly, and I know we're really, I'm looking at conscious of time because I know we're over time here. But I think what needs to happen is the evolution of a CDO, like a CTO, who started becoming a CEO. The CTOs in some tech firms started becoming the CEOs. When you have a CDO that starts becoming a CEO of an organization and shows people how data can be used in an organization to really blow up growth, innovation, understand your customer base, understand your opportunities, really grow into the market space, know what your products fit should be based on data and analytics. Once people seeing that happen and they watch it and it happens and it blows up, they go, we want to copy that. They'll go to this organization and find out what's happening there. So it definitely saw an evolution, and the importance of the CTO's role grew significantly when you start seeing CTOs actually become CEOs. The same thing happened with CFOs. CFOs that we're not seeing as the important bit, or they're just the budgeting guys. But the CFO is now widely seen in many places as the second in command in a company.
Yeah, definitely.
CFOs started being the people that became CEOs.
Yeah.
CFO will become the CEO afterwards. So when you see this evolution happen, and when that finally starts occurring, you will definitely see a switch. I can see that maybe 5-10 years down the line, we might see that evolution. I might be a little bit ahead of the curve in my thinking, but honestly, I'm very adamant these days when I see things that it doesn't sit within technology. It's not a technology function.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're seeing the emergence of the CDO, the Chief Data Officer, last 2-3 years. I mean, prior to that, wasn't really around. Chief Digital Officer, Chief Data Officer. It's definitely an up and coming type of role now. So yeah, interesting times. Amazing. So okay, cool. So we've kind of covered it off there really in terms of individuals within data getting in the way of themselves, your perception in terms of the future of data. I mean, amazing. Where do you want to end? I'm as you said, obviously, I'm conscious of time. Unfortunately, I want to do part 2. Part 2. I don't think we've kind of like touched the surface really. But look, where do you want to kind of end this off? I mean, in terms of we've got a growing audience of listeners, viewers, etc. Just going out to our data network of data professionals. How do you want to sign this off in terms of what?
I think I'll start it off by giving you advice. I mean, one of the things I always think about why aren't we seeing more Black people in senior roles is I think value the craft, understand the craft of what data is. Understand don't just look for what other people are doing, because many times this is an emerging industry. I wasn't learning just by going, I'm going to copy what everyone else was doing. I was thinking for myself and going, what needs to happen to make this work? You've heard me several times during this conversation talk about, I was almost inventing things along the way and seeing the results and actually making it up along the way. And I think people need to be prepared to say, right, just because someone told you this is what data governance looks like. I remember calling rebranding data governance within M&G as data knowledge. and that really sinking in and going, okay, we need knowledge about our data. Where is it? Where is it going? How is it being used? Who's transforming it? Who owns it? And some people went, oh yeah, that resonates with me. But when we said we need data governance, everyone went, oh. So
right.
you have to basically really don't just copy what everyone else is doing. Understand the reasons why you think it needs to. Understand your why better. Be better at communicating that out to the business. And remember, technology is not the thing. It's actually understanding the why. Technology is the enabler for data, not the other way around. Data is not
definitely
technology. So I definitely
I love that analogy about the sound, like Android versus iPhone. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's ultimately we're going to be using either of them to get the same result, to make that phone call, to send an email, to get on the internet. It's just an enabler to do that. And it's kind of getting in the way of the value of what we can do with that.
Or you have people saying to you, oh, one app store has 1 million versus another one has 5 million apps. Whoever uses 1 million or 5 million apps, you're probably going to use that 25 apps anyway. So if that. So, I think people need to really look at what the differentiators are, and the real differentiators are not the technology in many cases. The real differentiators are real understanding of data. So my advice to people is understand the data of your industry better and be able to articulate that story as well as you can.
Superb. And what would you say to any up-and-coming Black professionals in data? I mean, to better navigate their career. I mean, that is to kind of like own a segment of it, become, as you mentioned, from your branding.
I think you've always got two options when it comes to data. Two options. Anything else, it's the same with data. You can either become a specialist in something, and just what specialism in something absolutely pays. So you can become, an analytics specialist or an AI specialist. You can become an engineering specialist. These are all specialist things. You can become a data governance specialist. You can go a privacy specialist. The breadth of data is quite, so you can specialize in something, and you'll still get a great career, really good compensation in specializing in something.
100%.
Data officer, you're going to have to generalize like I did. I've done engineering, I've done governance, I've done analytics, I'm now looking at AI and automation. I have looked at, in the past, testing. I've looked at being a BA. I've done transformation projects. I've done operations roles. I've done valuations. I've done vendor management. I have a wide spectrum of experience to draw into, but that allows me to go into a meeting with a CFO and articulate
and have a wide
spectrum of things. But I'm no longer a specialist in one of these items. I cannot sit down and say to someone, oh yeah, give me a bit of Python, I'll write you the best code, because I can't anymore. Because
so if you you'd say to somebody, you got a choice, either become you, which is like a generalist, or would you say to somebody to drill down and become a specialist within a certain...
Depends your personality. I mean, I like the 1,000-foot vision. I like to go up and look at what's going on. And I like that. I like doing that. So that's why generalist and CDO makes sense to me. But I can still dig in and understand and have a low-level conversation, but I try and talk to the business. But
so it's a choice to make that decision. Someone's going to make that decision of where you want to go.
And I do think it depends on your personality, because personality types do matter in this. Some people are very much blue, detailed orientated people that really enjoy looking in the numbers and exploring it. Maybe you might be a data scientist. There's nothing wrong with that you get paid quite well to become this guru, but whatever you do, be excellent at it.
Right. Gotcha. Superb. Ovo, man, thanks so much, man. It's amazing. We're going to put part 2 in there soon, man. We're going to get you over to part 2. So I want to say, guests and listeners of this, loved it. Thank you so much, Ovo. You've been an amazing guest. Digital Hub 2023. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the support. If you like the content you're hearing in our episodes of Digital Hub, hit subscribe below. Thank you very much.